Great. Thanks for joining here, guys. Maybe first I will talk about the session. So we are talking today about billing nightmares and why billing is still a nightmare for engineers, and also why Lago created a solution, open source, to fix that. Anh-Tho, you want to introduce us?
Yeah, so my name is Anh-Tho, and this is Raffi, my co-founder. We might not look French, but we're French, if you're wondering. So we escaped the Olympics to come here in Austin. So just like very quickly about Lago, what we do is open source metering and usage-based billing. So we're the leading repo on GitHub. We previously built a homegrown billing system at fintech unicorn in Europe, which is called Conto. It's like the Brex of a ramp of Europe. We raised 22 million, and also Lago is used by companies like Mistral, Grok, and Moov today, and we're very happy to be here. So 2 years ago, we were featured by someone at GitHub at this conference. We were just starting out. It's still early days, but we're really, really happy to do this workshop today. Should I? So we'll start by billing nightmares. So a lot of people think billing is something for the finance team. We heard at this conference someone say, I'm an engineer, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to have anything to do with billing. Our whole thesis at Lago is billing is often a nightmare for engineers, so we'll go through that. The second part is why open source? What does open source have to do with billing? And we have a clear answer to that as well. And we'd love to have your views. And the third part will be how we approach things. And the last one is a case study about how Mistral, for instance, uses Lago to do usage-based metering and billing. So maybe how we started Lago. So we started the company 3 years ago. We went straight through Y Combinator. We were just a team of folks who liked working together. We had a lot of ideas about businesses. A lot of these ideas were good, some were not that good. We went through the Web3 rabbit hole, DAOs and all that. And at some point, we thought, what problem do we know about and are underestimated? And we thought, we spent so much efforts building a billing system at our previous company. Let's talk about that on Hack and Use. So Raffi posted his first post on Hack and Use a little bit more than 2 years ago. We were not expecting anything about it, because if you use Hack and Use, you know that you just post something and it gets forgotten. And it really blew up on Hack and Use, so it was the #1 post for more than 48 hours. And we had hundreds of comments, and they were really interesting and helped us build the whole project. So why is metering hard? Sorry, do you want to take this one?
So do you know, guys, the difference between metering and billing? Is there someone in the room that has implemented the metering and billing system? No? So we are going through that in a minute. So the tough thing of usage-based billing is that you have to ingest billions of events of your customers' consumption to make sure that you bill them correctly and you bill them the right usage, right? And there is a difference between metering and billing. The metering is just we ingest consumption, and billing is we price that and we package that into a proper invoice to your end users. And to do that, we have an example of a small application which is called a bulb. It's calculating kilowatt hours for the consumption of a bulb turning on. And I'm gonna go through that. So basically, here I got a small application, very simple. There is a bulb in the room. There is a switch button, pretty big. And what it does, basically, it assumes that the bulb is 60 watts, but we want to know what's the consumption of these customers for kilowatt hours. What's the proration for the kilowatts used in an hour, right? So what we do here is just we get the kilowatts. So We have this 1,000 here because we want to pass the watts to kilowatts. And we want to prorate that to the seconds used in an hour, right? So we have 3,600 seconds in an hour. And so what it does basically, if we turn the switch on, it just calculates the number of seconds and the kilowatt hours. So that's the metering. That's the consumption of your customers. Go ahead.
Not really a question, but we can't see your code. I can't read your code at all in this respect.
Oh, yeah, sure.
If you're trying to have us read it.
Yeah, sure. You're right.
Thank you.
So yeah, basically I was going through that. We assume that 60 watts for the bulb, and then we just do a simple calculation to calculate the proration for hours, and we get the kilowatt hours. And in that case here, that's what we call the metering. We calculate things. We display that in real time to the users, to the end users, because they want to know exactly what's the consumption, and we display that in your application. And the difference with billing, in billing we get the kilowatt per hour in that case, but we multiply by the price to bill your customer, invoice your customer, and that's the main difference. So here in that case, if we do have, let's say, $1,000 for kilowatt hours, which is very expensive, but somehow that's the case, then we have the billing in real time. And that's also something you might want to display to your end users. So that's a very simple use case of usage-based billing. But imagine that, for example, the bulb has a different watts, like you can modify the watts, or that's the case for, like, let's say, gigabytes seconds for storage. So imagine that you price the storage for your customers. It's a gigabyte hours. In that case, the gigabytes can vary over time. And then you also have to calculate the number of seconds used and display that to your end users. So that's getting complex when you have millions of customers, different types of items you want to bill your customers, and your consumption is varying over time, and you have very granular usage base. The second thing why billing is hard is billing is all about dates. Dates is used everywhere in billing, and somehow it's very complex to deal with dates. I'm going to go through like examples and edge cases. But dates are used for usage tracking. You want to know exactly what's the time frame for your usage. You want to issue the invoice at the right time. You want to ensure that you're paid at the right time. And that's all about dates, right? And the first example we have is the fun fact of time zones. You want to make sure that your bill invoice your customer in their time zones because they expect to have their invoice at the first day of the month, right? And we often go through that very specific edge case, which is the Samoa Islands. There are a bunch of islands, and there are two groups of islands. The first one is the Western Samoa, and the other one is the American Samoa, right? In that case, you know the difference between the two types of Samoas? The difference of hours? That's a day, exactly. So you are less than 200 miles away from one to another, but that's a day. So imagine that you have to invoice this customer the first day of the month, or imagine that you still have to ingest metering for like the storage they're using, the transaction they're making. In that case, you want to make sure it falls into the right month, right? So you don't want to bill in your time zone. You want to make sure that you adapt to your customer's time zone. Replicate that around the globe with all your customers, and that might be very messy. So I do have an example. Imagine that you're ingesting usage the last day of the month, and you're a US company, and you're billing for a European company. For them, it might be, let's say, the first of the month, or they expect you have the invoice, but for you, you're ingesting usage for the last day of the month. In that case, you want to adapt this usage to the customer's billing time zone and not yours. So that's making like a bit trickier to deal with dates and billing in that case. The other things with dates is about everything that is proration and used for what we call the billing boundaries. So you could have customers having very specific boundaries. Let's say you want to bill them on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, quarterly basis, and some of them might have very specific contracts length. Some of them might have, for example, yearly billing, but on top of that, they want to have monthly usage. So you want to price the usage on a monthly basis, but the entire contract is yearly. And sometimes you could deal also with prorations. So you might have an item, a billing item during the month, and somehow you want to prorate that to make sure that this is the right amount you want to bill. The best example in that case would be seats or users. You add the users in the middle of the month, and you want to make sure that you don't bill for the entire month, you just bill for a prorated amount of that. And then you have a bunch of edge cases. The first one being leap years. Usually it's pretty easy to do with code. The other one is your customer running on the calendar days, meaning that they expect the invoice at the first day of the month, or do they expect the invoice when they sign up and at each date when this, like 1 month after the sign up? What do we do with trials? Do we apply trials to the entire subscription itself? Do we apply trials to very specific items? How many days, months is the trial? Can I update that for my customers? If I have a specific negotiated contract with one of my customers, what's the difference between the trial days? And then another specific edge case we had this year is about like leap years in February, so I only had like 28 days. So if you want to prorate seats in that case, that's making things a bit complex. The other complexity with billing is about taxes. So it's not only like making sure you bill your customer correctly, but it also relates it to the fact that you want to apply the right tax rate to your customers. And somehow we call that the labyrinth of taxes because it's getting very complex, especially here in the US or in Europe. You have taxes for like basically the tax can vary because of like multiple dimensions. In that case, we go through a bunch of edge cases here related to what's the country of your customers. Do your customers have an employee in a specific state in the US? Is it a B2C or B2B customer? Do we have to apply local taxes or like global taxes? Do they sell physical goods or do they sell software, which is complex? For example, we have an example of customers of ours, which is Grok, and they sell like AI software and hardware, and it's taxed differently. So that's another complexity. And then you can apply the tax rate to your customer. So a bunch of items that are impacting the taxes. The first one would be, what's your company registration? So what's your company level tax? And when does that apply? So it should apply by default to all your customers in case they don't have a specific tax rate. Then you have a customer level tax. So what's the specificity of that customer? Is there a specific state, a specific product I want to tax for and change the tax rate for this customer? Then there is a product level tax rate, very used for fintech or finance companies. Somehow, if you're making a card transaction with your credit card, it's taxed differently than when you add a seat to your bank account or if you add a card to your bank account. So products are taxed completely differently. And then you have also exemption rules. You have some customers that can have, usually big customers that can have exemption certificates. And in that case, they're completely exempted, even if all the rules applied previously.
There are complexities about pricing and packaging. So a lot of people think billing is one thing you build once and it doesn't evolve. The reality is pricing always evolves. It's a living organism. I think the second thing is a lot of marketing, revenue execs or consultants think 80% of the work is just getting pricing right on a spreadsheet, and then there are a lot of tiny, gritty details to think about when you change pricing, a bit of customer strategy. How do you want to handle that? And then the practicalities of it. How do you do it in the system? And that's why it's so hard to get it right. So the first thing is about grandfathering. So grandfathering is, do you know what grandfathering is in pricing? Okay, awesome. So companies need to choose if they want to do it or not, keep the old pricing for the existing users. And companies also need to decide, if a user wants to change plans, do they fall onto the new pricing or not? So this is a complexity to think about when you're changing pricing. And also it's something to think about when you staff engineering teams on billing, because they will always have to maintain that. The second thing is about upgrades and downgrades. So what do you do when someone upgrades? Usually you earn more money, so you want the customer to upgrade like instantly. And for downgrades, you might want to wait a little bit that the existing cycle ends. But it can be different, like based on your customer strategy. There's also a question about prorating specific fees. Do you prorate them, or do you wait for the cycle to end? The other thing is, do you reset billing boundaries dates? So if you have a customer that is on an annual plan and changes plan, do you restart the cycle or not? And the last thing is, how do you handle refunds for customers, and how do you handle exceptions? Because there will always be exceptions with customer support, and that means that the billing system also needs to be built for these flexibilities. We have this meme.
Yeah, we have this meme like gathering all what we just discussed, but basically, so that's the reason why people think like it's a finance thing, but based on that, it's always the engineering team who has to implement all this and has to go through this, through all these edge cases, and sometimes like business teams would say, hey, it's very easy to implement, we should like add a new pricing in 2 days, and when you look at your code and what you did before, like it's getting complex, and you know that it's not going to be that easy. So basically, this meme is about all that. Do you have any questions so far? No?
So why open source? We were challenged a lot about open source. A lot of people didn't believe an open source billing made sense. So we're still in the early days, but we got like a great traction in terms of stars. And our thesis has always been the same. So companies continue building billing themselves because they're looking for extensibility. So there will always be a long tail of billing edge cases to address. The second thing is like engineering teams, they want transparency, so they don't want their billing to be a black box. That's the second thing that open source solves for. And the third thing is like they want their billing system to be connected to the rest of the finance tech stack, and they don't want to be locked in a like closed source ecosystem. So we really like for like open source would like address these three dimensions, hence like Lago today. And we also built Lago to address this.
Yeah, so the open source services we have are like, so we have different ones. The first one being the metering piece. So how would we ingest high volume of usage? And we are talking of billions of consumption usage and events a month. And that's very important for companies that have a lot of customers, a lot of like granularity in their usage, and want to display this usage to the end customer. That's the first piece. Then we have a second piece, which is the pricing and packaging. How do I make it easy for engineers to add a new pricing? How do I make sure that also maybe business teams can also change something in terms of pricing or in terms of subscription? And then that's the input of the billing. And then we have what we call the billing engine, which is how does this all calculate into a proper bill at the end of the month? How do we display current usage to the user? How do we make sure also that we have on top of that the tax added to this engine? And the result of all that is first invoicing. So you want to invoice your customers. You want to make sure that they get the bill and they receive that probably by email. Then you want to make sure that you run analytics on top of that. You don't want to be blind on how to run your billing and pricing strategy. Then you have payments. How do I get paid for this invoice? How do I connect to payment providers? And the last piece would be accounting. How do I display that and spread this information to my non-technical teams, like accounting teams, for example, that are using a bunch of tools. It could be like NetSuite, it could be QuickBooks, it could be Salesforce, tools that are not like usually used by engineers. And so I'm going to show you today a quick demo of Lago and basically try to reproduce the Mistral's pricing and show you a bunch of things we do here at Lago. Basically, we would go through like the entire usage, then set up a pricing and packaging and modify that. We also have a very specific use case for AI companies or cloud companies because payments are always prepaid or often prepaid with what we call prepaid credits. So you want to make sure that you prepay your usage in advance so you don't lose money. And then also how to ingest usage in real time. So I'm going to go to this application here. Basically, so that's the documentation. You can also deploy this exact same application on your own. I'm going to zoom in. Basically, that's a simple Docker image you can deploy, and you have access to our entire billing and metering system. So you can try that and replicate exactly your pricing strategy. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to I probably want to add all my customers, and those customers are the customers I will be billing for, right? So here, this is, can I zoom in here? Yes. So that's how that's a basic core API. In that case, I'm using Postman. And the goal here would be first to create my customer in my billing system. How do I spread this information across all the systems I have? And basically here, in Lago, that's just what we call a customer. And in that case, it has very specific information about like unique IDs, names, but also like address, states, tax identification number. Because in that case, we want to make sure also the right tax apply to this customer, right? So I'm going to send this customer here, and instantly that's like creating here a customer, and that customer can have a bunch of information. So it can be tied to different systems. Like imagine you are using Salesforce as a sales tool, then you can connect that directly to this external application. You can connect also tax provider, accounting tools, payment providers, so you can always have a one-one matching between this system and all the other systems you have. And the great thing about open source is that we make that easy to connect a new application for you. So if you have a very specific payment provider, or like let's take the example of fintech here, you don't have payment providers, you directly take the money out of the customer's account on their internal ledger. In that case, we make things easy to just take the money and have the connection with the payment system. Then I'm going to go here into the metering piece. At Lago, we call that billable metrics. That's all related to what we call usage and usage-based. And the billable metrics here is a way for us to aggregate usage upon your usage-based events you're sending. So basically, I'm going to go here through the UI. You have exactly the same thing through the API if you want to override all the values. The first thing I have to do here is probably define a name. So let's say here I'm going to price for AI tokens and a code, which is unique. And that code would be used in my usage-based events. I'm going to send that through all the events I'm using when my customers are consuming token. I'm going to send that through my application. Then you define how you want to measure all these events received by the usage-based application. In that case, you have two options. The first one being metered, meaning that you consume something during a period of time, let's say a month, and then it just resumes to zero at the end of the month or the period. So for AI token, I'm going to use that because my customers, they're consuming tokens during a month, and then at the end of the month, we just resume that to zero, and there is a brand new month, brand new consumption. You can have another use case. I will go through that just after, but we call that recurring. Let's say you have like seats or you have add-ons, and you don't want to send events again and again. So you tell the system that you send the event once, and then we keep that in memory over time, and we price that without you having to resend events all the time. And then we have what we call here the aggregation type. So what's the instruction you give to the system to aggregate all the events? So basically, the first one would be a simple one, the count. We are counting the number of events received. Very simple. Anytime something happens in your application, you send an event, and we count one to have the right number of units. Another example would be to count the unique values of something. So let's say, for example, you're pricing for a database and the unique rows you have in your database. Then somehow you want to count the unique rows you have and deduplicate the rows you've already updated before. It's kind of the same for, let's say, monthly track users in your application. If you bill for MTUs, in that case, you want every time a user logs in, you send an event, but somehow we deduplicate that based on the user ID. And you can just send that granularly We just send the row event, and we are in charge of deduplicating all that. Then you have a bunch of other options. The latest would be the latest value received, the maximum value received. We can sum, for example, a number of tokens. If you send, anytime there is in your AI application some token sent, in that case, we can sum all that. And the last one being what we call also the weighted sum, related to what we have for the kilowatts, the bulb application. So you send the watts, for example, you send the gigabytes, and we do prorate based on the amount of time used. So for example, we prorate that per second, and the usage base, the gigabytes can vary over time, and we always apply the right proration based on the seconds, the hours, or minutes defined. In that case here, I'm going to use the sum, because I'm going to sum all my tokens. And why we make it easy for usage-based companies at Lago is that you can have a very specific token here, which is a unique event, but we can add on top of that some dimensions to build for and some very specific filters. So, for example, the first filters could be the models used by your customers, right? So I'm going to go and give some model name. So here it can be like anything related to AI, but somehow I'm going to have model 1, I can have model 2, and model 3, and each of them has a very specific pricing. It's not exactly the same pricing. You could have the same for, let's say, storage. You have a very specific price per region, and so you don't want to. You have a price for. You have a metric for storage, but somehow you want to assign different events based on the region used by your customers. The second one would be, for example, the type of tokens used. It could be the input token, or it could be an output token. And in that case, I'm going to use these filters to make sure I'm creating combinations of values to have pricing for each combination. So that's how you can basically build a usage-based component on top of Lago. And in that case here, you can send in your events, there is a unique transaction ID. We use that as an independency key, so it's always unique on our side. So you don't send the event twice. And then you send just the code and the properties of all the events. And we are in charge of interpreting that into the right pricing and right usage for your customers. So that's an example. The other one could be, for example, if you price for seats. In that case, also very easy. But the seat will be probably a recurring metric because you add seats once, and then unless it's removed from your application, you still want to build that over time. And in that case, I want to go for a count unique. I'm counting the number of unique seats. And here I can just pass, for example, a value, which is the aggregation type, with the value, which is the seat ID. So I'm making sure I'm deduplicating all the seat IDs. So for example, if you have a user logging in, you send that to Lago as a unique event. You send the user ID, the seat ID, and we are in charge of deduplicating all that. If the metrics are a way to aggregate and interpret usage, we added on top of that a pricing and packaging motion, which is what we call the plans. And in that case, that's a way for you to define plans, define currencies, make sure that you have all your plans listed here, and also you have all your prices listed in that plan. So let's say, for example, in that case, we have an enterprise plan. That's the price plan I'm using on my application. It's a monthly one. I can define a default currency, but I can add many more because somehow this plan can be used in USD, but it can also be used in euros. And the first thing I have to do here, when I call the plan here, like the subscription, is we have to define a basic platform fee. What's the base cost of this plan? How much my customer needs to pay to be allowed to use this plan? Let's say in that case, I'm doing like $100 of platform fee, of subscription fee. You then need to define when it's built. Is it built, and that has to deal with dates. Do I want to build this $100 of subscription fee at the end of the period, meaning at the end of the month, or do I want to build that instantly at the beginning of the month and make sure I take the money first? So that's a first complexity with dates. And then you have what we call the trial period. And in that case, how many days of trial do you want to assign to this specific subscription here? And on top of that here, you might want to add all your usage-based charges. So what's the price for the charge you have been defining before? So let's say we have the tokens here. And in that case, what makes billing complex is that there is no one like standard pricing. You could have something like, it's, let's say, 10 cents per token, and that's the simplest use case you can have. But somehow your users can have like some tiers pricing. Let's say they want to have like the first units for free, and then on top of that, they're billed a specific amount. You can have like unlimited tiers of pricing. You can have package, so you price package of things. Let's say, for example, in that case, I want to price like package of 10,000 tokens. And in that case, that's making things complex. And it's even complex for different industries. I'm thinking of fintech, for example. Then we might want to use, like, if you're thinking of credit cards payments or like transfers, you want to probably bill for a percentage or cut on the revenue or cut on the transaction, right? So you want to define here, in that case, a percentage. And the percentage can be a percentage itself, but it can also be something with adding a fixed fee on top of that. So for example, if we take the example of Stripe, they have, like, for example, for payments, a product of 2% of Stripe payments, but on top of that, they are billing for a fixed fee of 10 cents per transaction. You want probably add some other complexity. What's the maximum amount I can bill for this specific transaction, for this specific event? So that's adding more and more complexity. In that case, I'm going to use probably the standard pricing to show you the combination of filters we've been defining before. You can say that you want to define a default price if none of your filters defined before is not matching the combination of your events here, of your properties. Then in that case, you want to fall back on the default price. And on top of that, you can decide to add some combination. So let's say I'm going to go into like Mistral pricing. They have a very specific price for the Model 1 and the output tokens. And they have another pricing for the Model 1 and the input tokens. So in that case, we want to define that. So let's say I want to bring here the Model 1, and I want to bring here the input type. In that case, I can define a very specific pricing for that. So let's say 10 cents. All right? I can decide to have another pricing for my Model 2 and output. And in that case, it's not 10 cents, but let's say it's 20 cents. And you can do that basically for all your filters. I'm not going to go through all that, but it's exactly the case. And as you have an unlimited number of filters and dimensions at Lago, you can build complex dimensions and pricing models you have in mind. So in that case here, let's say we have 30 cents. On top of that, you want to add probably the seats you have been defining before, right? And in that case, my user is already paying for the subscription $100. So I want to define what we call tiers of like radiated pricing. It's tiers. And let's say I have 3 types of tiers. The first one being, hey, for the first 10 seats, it's including in the platform fee, so I don't want to pay for that. For the next 10 one, I want probably to price that, let's say, $5 per seat. And the next one would be only $3 per seat. But that's also making things complex, because if you want to have real time and calculating usage based on these tiers and displaying that to your users, then it's making things a bit complex to calculate over time, because you want to have the calculation in real time, especially if you ingest billions of usage-based events. And the last piece would be what we call commitments. You can have maximum commitments. So let's say there is a customer that wants to have like maximum value of a total contract, or you can have minimum commitments. So you can say, you can have 2 types of commitments actually. The first one would be, for these very specific seats, I can have a spending minimum for that one. I can say, hey, I want my users to spend at least $100 of seats. And you can have the contract commitment. Let's say you are only usage-based, but you want like the invoice, the final invoice, to reach a minimum value. In that case, that would be a minimum value for the entire commitment. So in that case, let's say we have like $1,000 of minimum invoice you want to issue to your customers. So I'm going to create that plan. And then that plan can be applied to your customers. So that's what we call subscriptions. Subscription is just a way to assign a plan and start a billing period based on all the dates you've been defining before. So I'm going to go through this. I've been like that. There you go. And I'm going to apply things to this customer. But first, the very specific use case for AI before assigning this plan is that they often require you to prepay usage in advance. and do that through credits. So you have to sign up, you pay for credits in advance. Let's say you have to pay for 100 credits, or they offer you some credits. And in that case, the credits are consumed in real time based on your usage. And that's another use case for real-time billing, is that when you consume your usage of tokens in your ChatGPT Mistral application, then you want to see the consumption in real time of the tokens that have been consumed, right? So in Lago, you can do that through wallets. And let's say here, I'm going to assign some credits. You can define first when the user signs up, do you want to make them purchase some credits, or do you want to make them you want to offer them credits? In that case, I want to offer them, let's say, 10 credits for the first period. So if they sign up, I offer them 10 free credits. But on top of that, I'm asking them to top up anytime the number of credits is too low. So you have two options here. You have the fixed top-up, so you can say, hey, I want to top up this customer at like $50 and top up $50 anytime. Or you can target a balance, a very specific balance. And in that case, let's say I want to target like $100 for this specific wallet. So anytime the customers goes below a defined rule, then we will top up to 100 credits. And the trigger for this wallet top-up would be either the threshold, meaning that anytime the user is going down 5 credits, then I ask them automatically to re-top up and repay for new credits. Or we can do that also at very specific dates. So let's say we want to top up the credits on a monthly basis and then void all the credits and ask again the users to pay for new credits. Then you can also do that. So that's a way for you to make sure that you have a usage-based components, but that's predictable because somehow you can prepay usage over time. So you get money fast, you get paid, and then they're consuming for your product. I'm going to create this wallet here. And the billing would be assigning a plan and ingesting usage in real time. So here I'm going to use this very specific enterprise plan. I'm going to assign it, either you have the option to define if it's the first, like you want to build the first day of the month, or you want to build that at the very sign-up date of the customer. So imagine they sign up today, then every single day in a month, for example, at that specific day, you will build that. You can define the contract length. Is it a yearly contract? Is it a monthly contract? What's the end date of this contract? Do I have to renegotiate that? And on top of that, a great feature is that you can override the pricing. So there is a use case for that. If you have a sales team, for example, using Salesforce, and they're negotiating all your prices within Salesforce, then they might want to have adjustments in this pricing. They want to use the enterprise plan, but somehow the price per token would be slightly different for a specific customer. They negotiate the contract. So the subscription fee for this customer would not be like, let's say, $100, but it would be only $500. And the tokens would be a bit different. In that case here, it would be a bit lower than what we had on the default plan. And the model also output would be a bit lower than what we had on the default plan. So that's a way for you to adjust for a specific subscription, a very specific customer, the price for a very specific component. On top of that, I can define my own subscription ID and subscription name. Let's say they have multiple repositories. So let's say here is going to be sub 01, and the subscription name would be like repo A. In that case, the subscription ID would be useful for me to send all the usage-based events. That's the way I can target the usage-based billing to this specific subscription. So I'm going to assign this plan here. There is this plan with all the user activity. For now, if you go into what we call the real-time usage, so we have a way to display that to your end customer in real time. So if I decide to ingest usage, in that case, here I'm going to send some usage-based components. So here my code would be tokens, the code that I've been using for my specific event. The subscription would be subscription 1 we've been defining before. The property would be tokens. That's the one we've been defining here in the metrics. The property to aggregate, here are the tokens. And then we can play with all the new properties you can send in your event. So the models, for example. And here I'm going to send, let's say, the model 1. And I can send also the type And the type in that case would be, let's say, your customer is consuming an input token. So here, I'm going to go for input. So by sending that to the customer, I'm going to make sure I'm ingesting some usage in real time. And this usage is also consumed and aggregated in real time based on the wallets, because the wallets you had here is real-time like consumption. And your analytics here on top of that is tracking usage in real time. So that's based on the properties I've been sending here. That's splitting the right like usage into the right component of my pricing. So in that case, that would be the Model 1 input. But I can also do that for, let's say, the Model 1 output. And my customer is consuming new tokens, 100 tokens for the output Model 1. Then I can send that, and over time, it's like aggregating in real time, and you can display that to your end user. And the last piece of that would be probably issuing invoices. So you have a bunch of options. Here, you can define, or you can automatically define what's the tax rate for this customer by having like the customer address, the tax rate, the tax information. You can define what's the payment term, so when my customer should pay for a specific invoice. And you also have information about like very specific usage-based component called the grace period. How many days before I close this very specific usage invoice? So for example, in that case, let's say I want to have 2 days where I can adjust, after the billing period, I can adjust back my usage. And the reason why is that you can have some late tokens coming in at the very like end of the month. You can have very specific storage and gigabytes consumed at the very last day of the month, and you want to send some heartbeat of usage. And so you want to have 2 more days to adjust the usage for the previous period, right? So in that case, I'm going to generate an invoice for that. And basically, based on the 2 days of grace period, you will generate a very specific invoice for all that. So here, that's my invoice definition for the monthly plan. So what's the price, which is prorated based on the number of days. The subscription fee is always prorated, so we try to assign the right dates to that. And then what's the consumption for the tokens based on all the consumption I've been using, my customer has been using. And you can do that through the API, but you have 2 more days to finalize this invoice. So you can either send new events to adjust that, or you can say that, for example, a finance team can just adjust the bill. And in that case, it's a bit too high. This fee is a bit too high. So you can define that you want to change the total amount, or you want to change the total units consumed. So in that case, it's not like 10,000 units, but I want to make sure that they only consume 5,000 units. And that's adjusting the final fee. And you can decide to, like, I want to finalize this invoice today. And this invoice will be issued to my end customer. So there is a PDF invoice. There is a payment trigger to the right payment platform you've been using before. And basically, on top of that, you can also consume some credits in real time. Here, I consume the $10 credits I've been granted for free. And then you can adjust also invoiced after they're issued. For example, you want to issue a refund. In that case, you can also refund automatically this customer based on some reasons. So let's say that's a fraudulent charge, a fraudulent token. In that case, you want to define that, like this token, you want to refund that to $200. And in that case, you make a refund for $200. And that's directly sent to the payment provider you're using or the accounting tool you're using, so your finance team is always up to date. Is there any question? Yeah, go ahead.
For the real-time consuming credits,
yeah.
The threshold for when you would send the invoice, what do you have to put any means of like letting the application know that it needs to stop offering the service because what gets consumed all the credits?
So basically, if you don't have top-up rules, we consume the credits you have available in your balance, they're just consumed. And then when they're consumed, you cannot go down the balance. You just have to or prepay credits or use the basic usage and invoice the usage or ask for free top-up, for example. But in any case, you would need to have a positive balance to use the credits.
I guess, so let's say it's Mistral.ai.
Yeah.
They're servicing inference and someone tries to do a fraud
Yeah, so you have two options basically. Or you get an error code and you say you don't have sufficient credits to continue using the product. Or you can say, hey, I just want to invoice this usage. There is no credits anymore, and it will be like invoiced at the end of the period, like a normal billing thing. So you have both options actually. But you can also define to stop usage in that case.
Okay, thanks.
It was a perfect question for the transition, I think, because one of the main things with AI, but also it happens with fintech, is people can consume a lot and then they just don't pay, they run away, they sign up with a different email. So can we help with that? So we've been working on different offers to do that. So the first one is what we call threshold charging. So when a first batch of tokens are used, so we send an invoice straight away, and then we send a second invoice during the period. So we don't wait for the end of the period to invoice, which is a different kind of billing behaviors than traditional B2B SaaS. And it applies to AI very well because, as you know, the compute and inference costs are really, really high for these companies. So it's not a world of 80% margins. Another way to do this is to also invoice several times in the month. So you can do threshold charging with monthly billing that we show here. So this is a more elaborated use case. And sorry.
Yeah, so some of the customers we have that just don't want to use credits. They don't want to make them prepay, the customers prepay in advance. So in that case, we call that threshold or progressive billing, and it applies to real time. It's especially very difficult when you have millions of usage-based events, because you have to make sure that, let's say you want to invoice each $10 to your customers. You wait for the usage to reach $10, and then you invoice directly this customer. So it also has to do with the real-time and usage ingestion, because you have to make sure that at $10 of consumption for tokens, you stop the billing, you invoice the first bill for your customer, and then it's you start a brand new invoice and a brand new period. And again, it's a way for customers to make sure that they're paid in advance, or not waiting the end of the month to get paid. So payments is another component of the billing system. Go ahead.
Yeah, I came in late, so I apologize. I definitely get the application for LLM, right, where the meter runs hot as soon as you use it. You don't want to pay for it on behalf of your customer, right? Are there kind of meter solutions or use cases out there besides just a no-brainer?
Yeah, so we have, I would say, three big industries. The first one being AI, the second one being fintech. So for example, if you're charging for transactions, you want this transaction to be billed probably in real time. So let's say you're withdrawing money at an ATM. You want to make them pay $1 for any withdrawal they're making. So in real time, you want to tell the billing system that you charge them $1 on top of that. And that's another example of metering for another industry. And you can apply that to any fintech or finance movements you have. So you have FX transferring money in a different currency, then you'll probably take 2% out of that. And so that's how Moov, for example, uses Lago to build their own usage-based component for fintech. Another metering system would be probably cloud and infrastructure solutions. So if you are charging for storage, compute, and then you will probably have very granular usage for that. That's also complex because you want to prorate that per seconds, gigabyte seconds, gigabyte hours. And so that's also another type of metering on top of your billing system.
Yeah, there's also So there's also the case of the CPaaS, like Tridio-like companies, which is very common, and telcos as well, which is quite similar to AI. CPaaS, like Tridio-like companies, yeah. I learned this acronym too, like recently. Any other question? Cool. Thank you very much for coming.
There is a question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Do you do any kind of like multi-party payout support or like revenue sharing? Like, yeah, I guess where you could do like have a single invoice, but know how to split up the payment to different payments.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to billing, somehow you have like a bill, but on top of that, you can also maybe split the bill or have some cost on top of that. And we have like a feature called Cost Plus. Basically, you have 3 ways of doing that. The first one being splitting the bill. And you say, hey, this part of the bill goes to that partner and this part of the bill goes to the customer. You have another way of doing that is to make sure you track your costs. So let's say you have AI items you want to bill. You want to follow also your cost on top of that. So probably you want to also invoice some of the partners you have based on the total cost of your consumption yourself as a consumer of the billing engine. And the other one would be probably in fintech where you have cashback or chargeback when you want to also make sure you take money out of the transaction, you bill your customer, but somehow you redeem them part of the transaction. So that's also another use case.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.